President,
Majority Whip.
are we in a quorum call?
The Senate is not.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it's been nearly 10 months since that cold, dark morning when I was in the departure lounge at the main airport in Vilnius, Lithuania, with my colleague, Senator Chris Coons. We watched on television as Russia attempted to seize another sovereign country in the heart of Europe. I'll never forget those early scenes of Putin's horror unleashed on Ukraine. My friends in Lithuania who remember Soviet oppression all too well had warned of Russia's potential to strike again in Ukraine, in Europe, and beyond. Years earlier, I'd seen firsthand the seizure of Georgian land by the Russian military in 2008. In 2014, my friend and fellow colleague, the late Senator John McCain, and I, with a group of senators, paid tribute to those slain in Kyiv's Maidan Square just as Russia had seized Crimea and was looking to forcibly take other areas of Ukraine. But Putin and his henchmen failed miserably at understanding Ukraine and understanding their resolve to halt him and his brutality. His initial ploy to quickly topple Ukraine's democratic government and replace it with a puppet failed immediately. And other Russian military advances in eastern and southern Ukraine have been rolled back time and again. In fact, Ukraine's military has reclaimed hundreds of villages and more than 1,000 square miles of territory. Good for them. Quite simply, despite the horrific violence unleashed by Putin, the Ukrainian people have prevailed. Their courage, their sacrifice is inspiring. And the world has rallied to Ukraine's side, leaving Russia isolated, should be embarrassed, and in retreat from Putin's folly. Yesterday, I met with our ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield. We're lucky to have her. She is truly a skillful, experienced, and talented person. She reminded me earlier this year more than 140 UN member states voted overwhelmingly in support of a resolution that deplored in the strongest terms Putin's aggression. It also affirmed the international community's commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and integrity of Ukraine. Only 5 nations dissented. They're the world's worst dictatorships, aligning with Putin to vote against the measure at the United Nations. A reminder that Vladimir Putin has utterly failed in pursuing his twisted nostalgia for Soviet tyranny. And the NATO alliance is held firm in its strong support of Ukraine. This administration included providing weapons to help them defend their nation. More than 34 other nations joined us. The U.S. and several key allies have imposed sanctions on nearly 8,400 Russian oligarchs and their families, 1,500 Russian entities, and 100 Russian vessels. The nations of the free world understand that Ukraine is, in fact, our common front line in the battle for freedom in this world. President Biden, too, with Secretaries Blinken and Austin, has rallied unprecedented international support. Other nations clearly understand what's at stake. The struggle for the rule of law over the rule of chaos and brute force, that's what's at stake. And now it's time for the United States and the rest of the free world to continue to lift up our support. It can be easy to get impatient, even despair, as Ukraine faces continued Russian bombardment of civilian targets, and in many cases war crimes specifically designed to terrorize civilian populations. I'd like to show you a recent photo. It shows the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk. He's speaking to defenders in Kyiv in an underground shelter during a recent airstrike. Another of a child here, hauntingly looking at a damaged school. He's dressed for school. The building has been destroyed by Vladimir Putin. Ukrainian civil servants are working around the clock to restore access to electricity, water, and heat to allow hospitals and schools to function. The continued unified support and military assistance to NATO is invaluable, and this Congress has been unified in providing this aid. Make no mistake, Russia is losing the war in Ukraine. Its leaders now are trying to break the will of the Ukrainian people. As an amateur student of history, I know that the winter has often been a defense for the people of Russia. Napoleon's advance of his troops on Moscow was stymied by the coldest winter then imaginable. They said it was so cold that the birds fell from the sky. And we remember well what the Nazis faced when they invaded Russia with a bitter winter that was also a defense for the Russian people. Vladimir Putin has turned the tables and sadly is using winter as a weapon of war against common Ukrainian people, mothers, fathers, and children. I want to conclude by showing this one photo because it tells such a story. Members of the Ukrainian National Philharmonic Orchestra performing in a darkened theater in Kyiv on Tuesday, lit only by battery-powered lanterns. It says it all about the resilience of the Ukrainian people. Russia will fail. Slava Ukraini. Mr. President, I ask that the statement I'm about to be placed as a separate part in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, Congress has some big decisions to make in just 2 or 3 weeks. The continuing resolution which funds our government is about to expire. One of the decisions will be whether to include important measures to ensure that the Food and Drug Administration fulfills its public health mission. You see, when we passed the last CR in September, we reauthorized the user fees that are necessary to fund this critical agency. However, the package did not include common sense changes in the law, bipartisan changes, that really would make FDA a more effective agency. So we continued to pursue them this month. One of those measures was the Dietary Supplement Listing Act, a bipartisan bill that Senator Braun of Indiana and I introduced in April. More than 75% of people living in America, myself included, my family too, use a dietary supplement such as a vitamin or a mineral. However, many assume when reaching for that supplement bottle in the medicine cabinet that the Food and Drug Administration of the United States government knows what's in that bottle and knows that it's for sale. That's not always the case. Dietary supplement companies are not required to disclose to the Food and Drug Administration the ingredients in their products. Let me repeat that. Dietary supplement companies are not required by the Food and Drug Administration to disclose the ingredients in their products. They aren't even required to register that their products are for sale in the United States. An obvious problem exists. How can the FDA really regulate this market for the safety of American consumers when it doesn't know what's on the market? It can't. It's impossible. So the legislation I have with Republican Senator Braun would require supplement companies to tell the FDA what products they put on the shelf and what's in them. Just that basic. It's a simple fix that would improve the safety of the supplement market, and it would basically enhance quality companies selling quality dietary supplements. Others might be penalized by this. Good companies would not. I'm glad this legislation received an endorsement from the Council for Responsible Nutrition, one of the largest supplement trade associations in our nation. They're speaking for the good guys. I want to emphasize this is not a partisan idea. Polls show that 9 out of 10 Americans already believe that manufacturers should be required to list their products and their ingredients. 90% of Americans believe it, but they're wrong. In October, Scott Gottlieb and Mark McClellan, 2 Republican former FDA commissioners under Republican administrations, wrote that our legislation represents, quote, a once-in-a-generation reform. They concluded their article and said, Congress should seize this opportunity to achieve long-awaited reforms that modernize FDA regulation, promote innovation, and provide consumers greater assurance that the products they use are safe and reliable. I understand that some oppose the inclusion of my bipartisan legislation in the year-end package. I'm willing to work with any of them to overcome their resistance or to take their suggestions very seriously. But let's not move this package to fund the FDA and miss this opportunity. Consumers have waited long enough. The FDA needs to know what supplements are on the market and what their ingredients are, to protect consumers. That is a bare minimum. Mr. President, I ask consent that the statement I'm about to make be placed in a separate part of the record.
No objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, day before yesterday, it was reported that two of our colleagues, Senators Sinema and Tillis, are working together on a potential immigration package. And though I want to know more details about what they are considering, I want to thank them for showing this kind of initiative on this important issue. I believe we must pass immigration reform legislation before the end of the year. And the members of this Senate shouldn't leave for home and holidays until we take a vote to reform our broken immigration system. Now, I know some people at home may be wondering why. What's the urgency? Why do it now? Well, we first may have an opportunity, and I hope we do. But it could be the last opportunity for a long time. It's been more than 35 years since Congress has enacted a bill to reform our immigration system. With all of the attention paid on the issue of immigration and our borders, it is hard to imagine how a Congress can be critical of the fact that the situation is deteriorated and not take action for 35 years. That is shameful. Our failure to act on immigration hurts everyone, from hospitals in my state of Illinois struggling to find doctors and nurses, to asylum seekers fleeing violence and oppression. And there's one group of people in particular who've been left behind: dreamers. These young people who are American in every way except for the paperwork. We all know that dreamers have made a difference in our state. They're young people brought to the United States by their parents, grew up here, thought they had a future here, but find they're undocumented. Many of them were brought here as babies, and they've grown up alongside our own kids, pledged allegiance to the same American flag in their classrooms every morning. A few weeks ago, I had a chance to welcome some of these dreamers to Washington. As always, I was amazed by these young people. And above all, I was amazed by their passion to give back to the only home they've ever known, the United States of America. One of these I want to show you a photo of today is Eddie Rivera. He's a freshman at Dominican University in my home state of Illinois. He's studying to become a nurse. Over the years, I've come to the floor of the Senate to tell the stories of people just like Eddie, to show what's at stake when we consider the DREAM Act. Eddie's story is the 131st Dreamer story I've told on the Senate floor. You see, Eddie's family is originally from Honduras, and back there his mother was an attorney. And while you think that's a stable profession in Honduras, it was actually a liability. She received death threats because of her work, and it was out of fear for her young son's life that she sought refuge in America. Eddie's family moved a lot when he was growing up. They struggled to get by, but they came to rely on one another for support. When his grandmother was diagnosed with dementia, Eddie and his mom became her full-time caregivers. He would sit by his grandmother's side day by day, feeding her, praying for her, holding her hand. Sadly, his grandmother passed away in December of 2019. But it was this personal life experience, caring for his grandmother, that inspired Eddie to pursue a career in medicine and nursing. So when the COVID pandemic hit in 2020, he answered the call for duty. He was hired to assist the nursing staff in a COVID unit of a hospital in North Carolina. In this role, he tried to provide the same loving care to his patients that he once provided to his grandmother. And in the future, it's Eddie's hope that he can obtain his nursing degree and work at a retirement home, one where people can, quote, spend the rest of their lives living in dignity in a loving community respecting them, appreciating them for all they've given to society. So ask yourself a very basic question, which every senator should ask. Would America be better if Eddie Rivera were deported to Honduras, a country he barely remembers? Or would our nation be better to have Eddie here among our ranks, the ranks of healthcare professionals who make such a difference in their lives? And what about the more than 200,000 DACA recipients who also work on the front lines of the pandemic? Doctors, nurses, paramedics. Would we truly be better without them? Of course not. We need dreamers like Eddie, and we need to act on their behalf this month. In October, the Fifth Circuit returned a case to the lower court to determine whether DACA, which has protected 800,000 dreamers since 2012, will remain the law of the land. So unless Congress acts in the next few days to protect DACA recipients, this program could end even as soon as next year. And what does that mean for those 800,000 currently protected by DACA? Two things. They are subject to deportation at any moment, and they no longer have the legal right to work in the hospitals and clinics and businesses across America. If that happens, an average of 1,000 DACA recipients would lose their jobs each week in healthcare, education, and other sectors of our economy where we expect serious shortages. Look, I'm under no illusions about what it takes to pass an immigration package in a matter of 2 weeks or a few days. I know many of our Republican colleagues have their own priorities, and I'm willing to sit down and make sensible compromises to bring order to our border. But we need to move. We need to act, because as I mentioned, this could be the last chance in a long time. The incoming Republican House majority has already declared that they will not allow a vote on any immigration measure during the next Congress. It will be the same dynamic we saw in 2013, when we passed an immigration bill here in the Senate only to see it die in the House. Let's not repeat the same mistake. To my Republican colleagues, I say this: if you care about improving border security or helping address worker shortages, this is our last chance to do it. Let's give every dreamer in this country the peace of mind they deserve heading into the holiday season. And let's prove to the American people that we are capable of making tough decisions when the situation demands it. Mr. President, I yield the floor.